This is John Saxon, and you're watching a brand new DVD of Black Christmas, a film I starred in over 32 years ago in 1974. In the early 70s, horror cinema had not yet created a Michael Myers, who stalked the streets of Haddonfield, nor a Freddy, who even thought about invading the dreams of the children on Elm Street. But a film was about to be released to the world, a film that was very important to horror cinema and very influential. That film was Black Christmas. Black Christmas started life when a young Canadian writer named Roy Moore read a story about a series of murders in the Westmont section of Montreal. He sent the script out to many agents and studios, but no one was willing to touch it due to the nature of the script. Bob Clark made some changes and formed a modified package called Stop Me. Clark saw this movie as an opportunity to try to make a movie where you never got to see the killer. Could it even be done? Would audiences accept the twist and the lack of a resolution that other movies almost always had to deliver? Eventually, changing the title to Black Christmas, Bob Clark and its team hired a crew of young actors and actresses who would all go on to much bigger things in their respective fields. Olivia Hussey was booked to play our tortured heroine, Jess Bradford, the sweet young college girl, who has a rather highly strung boyfriend, Peter Smythe, played by Keir Dullea.
I'd never done a scary film, and Bob approached me to do it, and I just loved the whole idea of getting away from home, going there and doing something I'd never done before, and being the heroine of this very frightening plot. The whole experience was beautiful. Andrea Martin was very funny. She was a comedian. I didn't get to know Margot Kidder too well. She was very quiet and off on doing her thing, and Keir Dullea was very sweet.
First person I met for Black Christmas was Bob Clark, and he was holding auditions. He held my audition in a big hotel suite he had. As you can tell from the movie, you know, my part wasn't that big, you know, and so for him to get an idea of my acting ability, he had me read the Keir Dullea role. And when I finished, I remembered Bob kind of, you know, doing this and looking away, and I said to him, "Well, Mr. Clark, wait, I can do it better than that." He says, "No, no, no." He says, "That was fine." He says, "In fact, I'm wondering why I didn't see you for that part."
I don't remember a lot about the actual audition, although I do remember meeting Bob Clark. Very, very jovial man, isn't he? He was back then, he still is now. I don't really remember a lot about it. I mean, apart from probably having to read my few lines, and I remember being very happy getting the part because, as I said, it was the first feature film that I had done at that point and was about to be my first screen kiss as well.
I came on later to play the role of local police Lieutenant Ken Fuller. I think there was a sense of continuity and evenness in the character. He seemed to be somebody who was understanding, could see a little bit, like a detective should, you know, see into the situation, pick up little traces, and he was calm with all of those things. I think it was an attractive role.
It was the first day on the set, and I think Saxon was off, you know, meditating and concentrating on what he does. And I was kind of lost, you know, and so I started working and doing the scene and so on and so forth, and I remained somewhat frustrated. But somehow before the end of the day, I said, you know what, this works. So I figured this works, and I think I discovered the character of Sergeant Nash, in a sense by accident, but becoming aware of my own frustrations, I suppose. And then, of course, as it went on, and the laughter and the jokes and so on and so forth, I said, this I like this character, and I rediscovered that, a few days ago watching it.
Black Christmas really led the way when it came to defining horror and slasher film conventions.
I think the longevity comes from that it was so unique at that time. I mean, I would think all the John Carpenter films and all the Nightmare on Elm Street, all those films came much later. And certainly some of the techniques that Bob was using, and Reg Morris and Burt Dunk, very innovative for the time, because nobody had actually shot that kind of horror movie unless you go way, way back.
I think what I've learned since, because I've seen on television from time to time other films that were obscure that had the same ingredients, it was copied. And I think, real film buffs have indicated or said enough for me to understand that films that I never have seen, like Halloween or Friday the 13th, were kind of spawned from it.
It's got a rhythm, it's got a tension. There's no question that this is a scary movie still today. There's no question that there's a sense of a pervading sense of terror and danger for these girls. And all of that is there. Usually there's a different rhythm and a pace in films today, and this one appears to have been close enough that you don't notice that sense, which sometimes when you watch an old movie, the rhythm's wrong, the pace is wrong, the subtleties are wrong, and that isn't the case in this particular film. It's really, really quite strong still today.
Reginald Morris was selected as the director of photography, and he managed to give an innocent building a very ominous feel. Along with cameraman Burt Dunk, they devised a camera system for the point of view, the POV shots, that would allow the operator to keep both hands free for some key sequences.
It started, I guess, because of when I did the up the trellis shot, where I had the camera mounted on my shoulder on a special rig that I had made up, and so I guess that kind of established my hands for the rest of the movie. When we're strangling Lynn in the closet, for example, those are my hands. And again, the camera was mounted on my shoulder, and the plastic bag was mounted over the lens.
Who is it?
Throughout the film, the camera seems to close in ominously, circling the house and its victims.
The claustrophobic effect and everything was really created through the placement of the camera and the composition. And again, Reg, like I said, was a master at that. And, I was the guy that physically did all that. But I mean, it was really created through the choice of lenses and angles. And, but the house itself worked out very well. And I mean, I know they'd gone to a lot of trouble to find a spot that physically worked.
I mean, the character of the place just speaks for itself. It's very, very powerful. The inside, the main floor with the entrance, had particularly a very, very good staircase, because you had the scene of the girl on the phone at the bottom of the stairs, and you could see up the stairs immediately behind her, coming directly at her, not across the frame, but directly at the frame, which is much more menacing than somebody going across. And so that particular geography worked very well. You could see from that area right into the living room area where we needed a scene to happen for the party. And you could see from the area at the bottom of the stairs right into the dining area. And there was a sort of a whole geography possible for people coming and going, and lots of interest, lots of angles, lots of doorways. We painted and papered a good percentage of the house. We went with a fairly neutral tone downstairs in the main area and the hallways. And then upstairs, we tried to pick up the character of each of the girls, each of the different girls and the colors they were given. The Margot Kidder had the rather bold violet colors going for her, and the other girls had colors that were a little more appropriate for who they were and what their characters were.
Carl Zitra composed the music for Black Christmas with a very eerie piano strum mixed with wailing, moaning voices, providing a very spooky and distinctive score. To this day, it's one of the many elements that fans discuss on a regular basis.
It was a relatively quiet horror film. It didn't have, of course it had screams and stabs and its share of high intensity sound, but it reminded me of when I, in certain scenes, tried to, kill the actor along with Billy killing the actor, and I'd have stabs and shrieks and screams and musical explosions and everything that we could possibly think of. And I remember Bob resisted that from the very beginning with, saying, well, it's not necessary. Let it breathe. And I thought at the time, well, he might not be right, but I can always point my finger at him if people don't like it, and he made me do it. But now I have to say that 25 years later, he was absolutely correct. And I think that's what makes the film stand up. It doesn't overpower, it doesn't overwhelm, it doesn't insult the audience with, you must see this the way I intend for you to see it. It takes the chance, and it makes the people seem real, and it doesn't overcook the story.
Hello? Hello?
Carl also mixed the very scary phone calls and voices used by the killer, mixing Nick Mancuso, Bob Clark, and various other performers.
What do you want? Why are you doing this?
At some point, we brought in an actor, Nick Mancuso, who was, I remember, not so much specifically what he said, but I will never forget the intensity with which he delivered his lines. We experimented with filtering it for telephone and thus sharpening it up, and that was, you might think that's very simple to do. You just turn on the telephone filter or have him say it through a telephone. I can tell you it certainly was at the time anything but simple. But that sharpness, I believe, added a great deal of intensity to the voice. And I also have to hesitate to add that, I was not doing this on my own in any respect. There was a great genius of a man named Ken Healy-Ray, who taught us, or certainly me, probably more about sound and music than anyone else I've ever worked with. And he came up with much of this concept of how to treat the voice.
What your mother and I must know is... just like having a wart removed. Oh my God.
The marketing campaign in Canada was very successful, with eerie adverts appearing in the local newspapers showing weird drawings and counting down the days till a Black Christmas. The Canadian release was a great success, and the movie was picked up by Warner Brothers to show in the United States. Word of mouth wasn't generated, and the release mishandled to a poor box office return. Black Christmas has recovered a lot of ground in the last 10 years due to the efforts of fans on the internet and recent DVD releases.
Agnes, it's me, Billy.
"32 years later, we have the movie out on nearly every format known to man. The picture has been improved and the sound made to near theater quality. Where does Black Christmas go from here? Who knows? But for those of us involved, we have our own special memories of that winter back in 1974.
I think that scene, when I look at it now, I go, I really was being strangled with a bag over my head. It looks really believable to me. Now in my career, I tend to play more people that survive than I did back then.
Stabbed to death by a glass unicorn. I had never figured out when we were shooting it quite what was happening. You know, the ending of these horror movies can always be a little confusing, and I had no idea till I saw the movie what had happened to me. I knew there was a scene in which I was wrapped in stuff and blood and all that, and we were laughing so hard when we were shooting it.
I think Bob and I disagreed about the pronunciation of Fellatio. He said fellatio. I said, isn't it fellatio? No, fellatio, fellatio.
I think by, I'm not sure even me at that time was quite sure. So, and I realized that, so I said, let it ride, let it run, But I think I actually knew what it was before that happened. But I think when it came up, I was quite sure. So I let Nash run with it, as it were, so it worked.
I didn't see the film for years after finishing it because scary films scare me. But then when I finally saw it, I was really proud of it. It was just a beautiful little film, and I think Bob Clark is a genius of a director. I wish he did more films like that, in fact. And it is a classic. In its genre, it's a classic. It's as much classic as a Romeo and Juliet or a Jesus of Nazareth in its own way. It has a huge fan base.
When I saw it recently, I thought, damn, that is one of the most clear cases of a leading man. I mean, I was presented very, and the shots of me were very, very nice. I was presented, everything was very positive about the approach, except, of course, that the guy makes the big mistake in the end of the film.
Working with Bob, it was easy. It was pleasant. You work and you get your job done, and Bob was great to work with, I think. And then the cast were all, I think, including Margot. She was a fire. She was a life. She carried. When I was on the set with her, in fact, she was really full of life, and that was good. And everybody was. It was relaxed, and it wasn't. You didn't feel a lot of tension. You didn't feel egos running around.
It's always fun when it's an ensemble, when you have a whole bunch of people and you're all on the same page, and that's what you always hope for. Andrea was very funny. This Michael Rappaport, who wherever he is, he was a very funny guy. The lady that played the house mom, her name escapes me at the moment, but she was hilarious, and it was great fun. Doug McGrath isn't so funny, but I'm kidding, Doug.